Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. Welcome to this webinar entitled Governance and Provisioning in Microsoft 365 and Teams. Conversation with myself, Michael Pisarek, and Peter Carson, who is also joining me. Just before I introduce Peter, let me just introduce myself. But first of all, thank you everyone for joining us. Me and Peter are super excited to have, a pretty open and a bit of a free-form conversation, really around governance in 365, SharePoint, groups and teams, and also a whole range of discussions around provisioning also. So a little bit about myself. My name is Michael Pisarek. I'm the CEO here at Orchestry Software. Previously, I was the founder of an intranet in a box company, which was acquired a couple of years ago. My role here at Orchestry is really to drive the product direction, work with all the other team members that we have. If you haven't heard of Orchestry, we are an adoption and a governance tool for Microsoft 365. So really, we've been living the whole provisioning and governance space or journey for the last year while building the product. So really excited to have you here. Peter, why don't I hand it over to you to introduce yourself, and looking forward to a pretty interesting conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Michael. Yes, Peter Carson here, President of Extranet User Manager, also an Office Apps and Services MVP. Contact details are up in here, so feel free to reach out. We are going to be publishing the slide deck as well as the recording for the session for folks that aren't able to join this afternoon, or if you want to come back to refer to anything, all that will be there. We'll send a follow-up email after the event once that's all ready and available for you. So Michael, I'll flip it back over to you. Or sorry, no, I was going to take the agenda. Yes, we're doing this live as we're going. So we've done the introductions. We do have a Microsoft form survey, and we've gotten about 20 responses back so far on that. So for the folks of you that have filled that out, thank you. For folks that haven't, we're going to share the link just in a second on that, and then we're just going to get right into discussions. And as Michael said, it is going to be very free form and open, and even more than just two-way. Post your questions up into the Q&A and go to webinar. Logan and Erica are going to be moderating that for us, and if there's ones that they want to jump into that are timely at that moment, we can certainly take different directions from there. So at the same time, we've got social links up in here, so if you want to tweet out or connect up from that point of view, absolutely reach out from that perspective.
Yeah, and as Peter said, just to jump in, feel free to use this, Peter, and I'm sure you're fine with this. Everyone on the call, feel free to use us for as much free consulting as you basically like during this call. So as many questions as you have, like I said, we really want this to be a value for everyone listening. So yeah, feel free to use the Q&A panel, and we've got Erica and Logan as well for both the teams here to help do that. But lots of questions. Don't feel awkward. Don't feel silly. Like I said, I'm sure there's a lot of questions which everyone may have, so feel free to do that. And Peter, I'll hand it back to you just for the form survey as well, so people have the link here.
Yeah, so Erica or Logan, if you don't mind chatting that link out through the chat to attendees as well. It's a bit of a long one, apologies. So this is using Microsoft Forms. If you haven't used it before, it's actually a really easy way to create a survey or a form. It's not long, there's only 5 steps, 8 questions, maybe 5 minutes or so to go to complete. So if you haven't, and if you like multitasking, by all means, have a whirl through there. About halfway through the discussion, we're going to pause and have a look at the summary results from there. So we're not going to be sharing any individual responses, but more just as a whole from the group and in terms of how people are using Microsoft 365 today.
Awesome. All right, Peter, let's get going with our first topic.
Sure. So we're going to be talking about Microsoft 365 as a whole, but these days, I mean, you can't talk about that without talking about Teams. I mean, it's all Teams for Microsoft, and that's really the focus. And we're all in this COVID experience together. Everybody's been thrust into remote working, and people, whether it's Zoom or Teams or other remote working and desktop sharing and video calling type of technology that they're using, have kind of been thrust into the deep end on that side. So it's really accelerated a lot of people's remote working plans. And what we want to talk about today is, we're 6 months in, the dust should be settling on the just getting people on and used to using those tools. How do you actually start using them effectively? And we've been working a lot on the Envision IT Extranet User Manager side around this concept of maturity and understanding how people are using the products, and then how can we help from a change management and adoption to drive that further. Things like using chat. I just asked Erica to chat out to the attendees that link. That one-to-one chat is one way of working. Actually, a better way in general is to use channel conversations and having that idea of persistent conversations that people maybe not even part of that initial conversation still have visibility to, can search and can benefit from. It's this concept we like to call working out loud, that rather than private, discrete conversations, it doesn't have to be the whole organization, but it can be a whole working group from there. And that really comes to how do we go beyond the sort of Skype for Business style of using Teams into the whole teams and channels, and what does that mean for your organization? How do you decide what a channel or a team represents? For Envision IT, which is our parent company on the Extranet User Manager side, we're a Microsoft 365 consulting firm. So we do engagements with clients, and often we have multiple projects. And we decided, what, we could create a team for every project, but that's a little much. We don't want that many teams. So let's have a team for every client, and we're going to create channels for projects within that. So you, as an organization, have to decide, well, what's, it's kind of our core business. You're always going to have department level teams, but what does a team represent on your side? So Michael, on the Orchestry side, tell us how Teams is used within your organization.
Yeah, so we've so it's interesting because we've just gone through this process. So Orchestry, we've got a bunch of internal teams which correspond to kind of the internal areas that we have. So we have a team around product design, we have a team for marketing, we have a team for sales, we have a teams for operation. So quite departmental driven, I think, which is fairly common. Within each of those teams, there's obviously channels. Now, those channels kind of differ across each one of those particular department teams. But one of the processes that we just went through was obviously we have a partner channel within Orchestry, and because we use Teams, obviously instead of us using something like email to communicate out to our partners, like new collateral or new documents or even conversations, we wanted to use Teams. So we could have approached it in a couple of different ways. So one of the ways would have been we could have created one team and have each partner as an individual private channel within that team. Now, the reason that we do that is what we want to have the ability to do is we want partners to be able to have private communication with us as an Orchestry team. So that's one requirement. But in addition to that, we also want them to have the ability to have access to some general collateral, right? So things like sales documentation, product documentation, marketing.
Things across the whole partner community, yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. So one of the ways we could have done that is said, well, let's create one team called partners and create individual private channels. So that's something that's relatively new, I think, in M365, and have a private channel for each partner. Now we didn't go down that.
Then you get into the challenges, don't you? That there's limits. What is it? 30 private channels per team, and how many partners do we have? I mean, you have to think about those scalability issues as you're planning this around as well.
Exactly. And the other thing, Peter, that kind of what we wanted to do is we thought, well, if there's just one channel basically, or one private channel for each partner, the problem is we're going to have discussions with partners around multiple things, some sales discussions, some marketing discussions, some general discussions also, and just having one channel for all of those discussions in that one channel we thought was going to be a little bit cumbersome. I think it's something that we commonly see with customers as well, where they create teams and they don't really know around the concept of channels and how you could use channels to break up not just documents but also conversation flow or posts. And you'll find that an organization deploys a team, the only channel that they have is in general, and then everything goes into this general channel, right? And you have this massive,
just a dumping ground for everything. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and you have this channel which, if you scroll up, it takes 20 days because there's 400 meters vertically of conversations there. So what we ended up doing is really going a little bit of a different approach. So each partner now gets their own team, so they have their own team there. That's actually quite nice for us because it allows us to easily control which partners are within that particular team. But also the other thing that it allows us to do is within each partner team, we also have channels within there as well. So we have a channels for sales conversations, for marketing conversations. I think we have one for fun stuff as well, just to keep it, a bit of fun there as well. Keep it a little bit light. So there we can have those conversations with our partners in each individual team. The other thing that we also did, and this is kind of interesting, is like I said, because each partner is in their own individual team, we wanted to make sure that every partner also had access to a central set of documents, right? So instead of us then uploading the same, Orchestry overview sheet into each individual partner team, which would have been a nightmare. What we did is we also created a kind of central partner team there where we invite all partners, and that's essentially a read-only portal which has all of the stuff that's common across all partners. So all of the marketing collateral, some forms, some templates, and so forth. So that's kind of worked pretty well, just because, like I said, it gives us a little bit of flexibility there in terms of, here's all the individual partner teams, as well as here's this main kind of partner portal team, which has all of the generic information in there. But it's an interesting process to go down. I mean, Peter, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I think because teams are so new, on the intranet side, we've been doing intranet information architecture and, web content structure for so long. I think it's a little bit easier, but definitely from the team side, organizing teams, and in particular, then how do you use channels and tabs to create that information architecture within teams, I think is pretty new. And I also think it's something that a lot of organizations are having some challenges with.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point. I mean, our roots is as a SharePoint consultancy company. That's where we started on premise and then evolved into Office 365, now Microsoft 365. But now when we engage with clients, we're talking about an information architecture. We actually don't start in SharePoint, we start in Teams, because there's certain things like the site structure and even the folder structure within document libraries that Teams defines. So you kind of have to think about it, what are we doing in Teams first, and what do Teams represent for our organization? And then the IA gets deeper on the SharePoint side, but it's driven by the decisions that you made on the team side, which, I mean, the last question on here is a bit of a softball to both of us, which is the out-of-the-box self-provisioning a good idea? A big no from me from that point of view, for this very reason, is that you should really think about how you want to roll teams out in your organization. And I don't mean from a getting everybody on and being able to do a meeting point of view. I mean from this information architecture planning point of view. If you want to really roll out the teams and channels properly, do it properly. Don't just let everybody create teams ad hoc and you've got 3 project teams for the same project and all these orphaned, unused teams. It becomes just a graveyard of teams that confuses people. So you really want to get ahead of that and not allow that from that point of view.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think there's a bit of a misnomer at the moment in terms of when rolling out teams where, let's just put it into the wild and end users are going to work it out themselves. I think that's definitely doesn't happen. I mean, from our experience, working with lots of organizations, and I know we've talked about this, Peter, the idea of just rolling out teams, even if you provide your end users, training and some additional content there, Teams is not a simple product, because it relies really on that M365 ecosystem. And let's be honest, there's a bunch of stuff there, a lot of issues, a lot of tools, a lot of capabilities.
A lot of choices.
A lot of choices. Yeah, I mean,
what to use when is a common question. Yeah, do I email? Do I do a Teams chat, a message? I don't know. There's too many choices there often from Microsoft. Actually, that's probably a good lead-in if we want to flip to the next slide, which is all around governance. And the approach I take is that governance doesn't mean locking it down and not letting anybody do anything and saying some poor person in IT becomes the gatekeeper that all the requests come to. There still needs to be self-service. And it's not about preventing people from doing things. It's about making them easy to follow a well thought out pattern. And I think you and I have both independently arrived at that same conclusion, that this idea of templates and suggestions instead of inflexible rules is a lot more palatable for people. If you say, you're not allowed to do that, that turns people off. If you say, I've made it really easy to use this pre-configured thing that's all been thought out for our organization, and that's the path of least resistance, people are going to choose it.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we have a saying, and I'm pretty passionate about this, right? People aren't going to M365 for Teams and SharePoint sites. They want solutions to their challenges, right? So they want to manage a project. They want to collaborate with internal users or external users. They want to manage a product development lifecycle. I 100% agree. And I think obviously Microsoft is arriving at that conclusion also. There is some new capabilities which are pretty simple, but at least they go some of the way of giving your users the ability to choose from a set of Teams templates and a set of SharePoint templates there. But really, I think the idea is that users just want somewhere to start. And I think this is why if you look at some products outside of M365, this is why they've been really successful. Like look at products like Asana, for instance. With Asana, it's very rare that a user goes up to Asana, signs for it, and then starts putting in tasks and tries to work it out themselves. What do? They go and they use the templates within Asana. And it's the same thing with Monday.com, or we were just looking at product management solutions to manage product features. It's the same thing. They give you a starting point, a tangible example that, of course, you can customize later on, but at least it gives you an idea and provides some best practices and suggestions around the kind of tooling that you should use and need. So like you said before, Peter.
One of the key things I think we're both saying here, though, is it's more than just Teams. Teams is part of the 365 ecosystem, and yes, Microsoft is starting to provide some simple templating, but they're very focused just on Teams itself. And when we think about, OneNote Planner, we're going to share the form survey result, and we'll see how people are using the different tools. I think there's a mission at the Teams engineering group in Redmond to supplant Outlook as the place people go to. Today, historically, people tend to go to their Outlook to look at their email and to look at their calendar, and that's shifting to the Teams client. But it means that you're bringing all these different apps together into one place. And there's lists coming that are sort of being separated from SharePoint, but we use OneNote a lot, we use Planner a lot, we use Stream a lot, and seeing those integrated in is really important. And the ability to pre-configure those, like you say, to have that Asana style template of not just team, but all the supporting pieces that make that up is really key.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to view it, Teams, it's almost like a single window to the world in the rest of M365. And yeah. I'm shocked, I'm sure you are as well, about how many people who say they hate SharePoint, but they love Teams, and they don't realize just how much of, yeah, they just don't realize how much. Yeah, it's driving the majority, at least from a document management perspective, functionality there as well. But I totally agree. I mean, it's really, I think when we're talking about pre-configuration and templating, really, when we're talking about Teams, really we're talking about it from the Microsoft Group's perspective, right? So everything within that group. So, definitely something what we do, and I know what your tool does as well, is the ability not just to have pre-configured channels and pre-configured tabs, but maybe having something like Planner pre-configured with a template with some buckets and some tasks. Super useful for most kinds of scenarios from a task management perspective, whether it's project task basis, whether you're developing a product and you want to do more of a Kanban style approach, having that. And the other big thing for me is around SharePoint, because I think SharePoint still has a really big role to play and can shine, particularly if those SharePoint sites are once again templatized a little bit or pre-configured a little bit there, because I still think they can provide some really important information in a number of different scenarios. So in our partner Teams, for instance, what we do is we have a SharePoint site there that allows us to push down news to all of the partners, so we don't have to hammer them with channel messages, for instance. It allows us to have some pre-configured links. It also allows us to show some other items, recently updated documents, contact information. So I really think that from that kind of pre-configuration perspective, really when you're looking at developing these templates, it should be a little bit more holistic than just Teams and channels and tabs. Look at SharePoint, look at Planner, look at OneNote even. The question of, does anyone like wiki tabs? Most of the people, yeah, well, most of the people that I've
form survey, I'd be curious to see what people would have said.
I know, it's kind of it's very odd, right? There's like a universal dislike of that wiki functionality, and most people
use OneNote. I love OneNote.
Yeah, I mean that's what we see. The majority of the people are using OneNote, and we are seeing a lot more customers as well around the concept of a OneNote template. So once again, maybe having a OneNote workbook with some pre-configured sections and some pre-configured tabs there, and also pages available.
Well, I love the idea of aligning things. Like you've got channels and teams, and what we've adopted as an organization is we create a section in OneNote that corresponds to each channel in the team, and we put that as a tab in that channel, so that if I've got some jot notes around this channel, it's in the right spot and I can find it. And the beauty of that is if you do it in a consistent way and you don't make people have to do the work to set that up, you do it for them. Everybody knows when they join a new team, this is how it's organized. This is where I go find stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, Streams is the one holdout there. I'm still dying for Microsoft to release an API so we can do some automation around, the creation of channels and streams, which have no bearing on the channels in Teams, and maybe link those together as well from that point of view. I mean, that's been a top thing in user voice for years now.
Well, maybe stay tuned to Ignite, because I saw there's
that's going to be the big reveal for lots of things.
there.
Yes.
I think so, yeah. And then the other thing as well is around third-party apps. I mean, this is an interesting point here as well. You know, for organizations that are using third-party apps, you know, having the ability to kind of embed those in there. And you know, it's really funny. When I was, so we you know, obviously a product company, and I was looking for a product management kind of piece of software, because obviously Teams and SharePoint is probably not the best thing, but in terms of features and having a portal where people can vote on, you know, it was the first time that I had ever looked at any kind of software tool, and one of my key criteria was, is there a native integration within Teams? Right? Because if I have a third-party tool, it'd be great if I could have it as part of Teams. So once again, I don't have to go to, you know, something else or to a website working in there. Unfortunately, none of them do. So I kind of missed out on that. But definitely from that third-party app perspective, you know, whether it's internally built or externally built, I think this could be something that's super powerful, Peter, as well. You know, just having, you know, if you're not using Planner or you're using something else, Trello or something else for managing tasks, for instance, having all of that in one experience for users, incredibly useful, especially if it's pre-configured.
Well, even if it's as simple as, you know, we pre-configured a web tab with a URL that points right to the task for that channel in Trello, for example. I mean, you can make it easy for people and provide that integration, even if the vendors haven't built those points of integration yet.
Yeah, yeah. And what about approvals, Peter? What's your thought around?
That's a touchy topic with people. You know, some people say there should be no approvals anywhere. Others say, you know, everything needs to be approval. I'm kind of a middle of the road that says, hey, for certain types of templates, you know, it's an ad hoc project team that I'm spinning up. Maybe I should be able to do that without any approval, or maybe I belong to a super user group that's been pre-cleared and trained and I don't need approval and somebody else does. I mean, there's lots of ways you can slice and dice that. The beauty is, I mean, we use Power Automate or Logic Apps as workflow tools, and building those sophisticated approvals, if you want to get beyond just a on or off kind of state, is actually really easy these days to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I'm not sure why people have such an issue with approvals. And I think it's more to the sense of the reason that people hate approvals is typically you send something for approval and it takes like 27 days for it to come back.
That's the thing.
Right?
I mean, people want instant gratification. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I think I definitely think like you, there's different types of templates there or different types of, you know, scenarios that you might want to have approvals enabled when you are provisioning items. But I think regardless, all of those approvals should be done in a timely manner. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've found. We've got some approval capabilities within Orchestry, and as long as it's done quickly, people don't really mind. What they do get annoyed with is if, you know, they send something for approval and they need a site now and it comes back in 5 days, right? That's something that tends to drive people.
Well, then they've gone to their own, got the credit card out and let's get some shadow IT going, which is what you don't want to have happening. I mean, the naming conventions kind of plays into that too. I mean, some of it isn't about approval, some of it's just about having some rules in there. Is there a whitelist, blacklist? Should anybody be able to create a team called human resources? Probably not, because, you know, the HR department kind of wants to own that team, and that's the obvious example, but there's others like that you want to deal with as part of that.
Yeah, we've seen. I think naming conventions, personally, I think that they're super important, because really it's the only out of the box way within Teams on that left-hand side that you can assign kind of like a metadata category to Teams, right? So what we do a lot within Orchestry is if every time someone creates something like a project workspace, maybe they pre-pen something like PRJ, right, to the title, or it's a suffix. So at least visually it gives people an idea of like what this actually is, because people are terrible at naming anyway, and then most people don't fill in the team or the site description either, which is a real shame. But I think the problem is the out of the box naming conventions around the group naming, right, is pretty basic, and it applies to all groups. It has to be done on a bit more of a granular
basis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the key is, I mean, SharePoint's gone here already a couple of years ago with Modern, and Teams is the same. It's a big flat structure. There's no hierarchy in there. So how do you build that hierarchy? You can do it with hub sites and SharePoint. You know, naming conventions help provide some of that structure on the team side of things. There's different ways you can collect that together.
Actually, Peter, I've got a question here for you from the audience. So thank you, Norm. What do you think of Teams for virtual meetings? We could have used it for this for this presentation.
Can
This
I
is-
hold
this
that
is-
one? Because I'm actually going to talk
this
about
is-
that one.
Actually, you're right. Yeah. Let's hold. There's another one here as well from Jesslyn. Thank you, Jesslyn. I've have started subbing lists on items that I was previously using Planner for. The integration with Flow is nice. Yep, I totally agree. I think I really like Planner. I think it's a great tool. I mean, it's got a bunch more capabilities than a simple list, but it would be great if you could use a bit of Flow on there as well. I think the new Microsoft list capability with Flow is pretty powerful.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Flow and Logic Apps and that ability to build those workflows. So yeah, having the connectors and the triggers in the tool makes it so much easier. I'd love one actually on the next point on channel creation. There actually isn't a Flow trigger when somebody creates a channel. It'd be great to say, hey, channel just got created and I want these tabs set up in it. I mean, that's something that you're dealing with on the Orchestry side, aren't you?
Yeah, we are. I mean, we've got so we've definitely got some ideas around the concept of what we call channel templates. So I think it's what exactly you're talking about. So maybe users after the team is created, they can choose or they can create their own channels, but it will almost be like the concept of a channel template. So maybe they choose a particular channel, and when they get that channel created, like I said, it's not just a blank channel, but there's tabs and some configuration pieces already there. I think that would be really useful.
I talked to Microsoft. Can we actually take over the create channel UI in Teams? And the answer is no today. So then I thought, well, we haven't built this, but wouldn't it be cool that when I create a channel, there's a Teams bot that responds to that channel to say, hey, I noticed you just created me. Would you like a OneNote planner, and right in place in the conversation, yes, and then it just goes and magically sets it up for you. It's coming back to that templating. It's so powerful to say, hey, if I make this really easy for people to follow a pattern, then that's good for everybody.
Exactly. Well, let's move on here, Peter. Let's talk about integration here.
Yeah, actually, that was a good segue in terms of the customization. What happens when a team gets provisioned, or how do we kick that process off? I mean, we're going to talk in a minute about your product, Orchestry, which is all about the provisioning side of that. And you guys have done an awesome job on the front-end user experience and how I build my templates and such. We've kind of taken it from a different approach. We've got an open source solution around that where we do have front-end components. I have to admit, pales in comparison to what you've done, Michael, but where we've spent a lot of our time is from an integration point of view to say, okay, this is part of a bigger process. We've got SAP as an ERP system, and as a customer record gets created in SAP, we want things to happen in SharePoint and Teams as part of that. Or we've got a project management system. We work with a number of consulting companies, not in the technology space, actually architecture, construction, things like that. And they've got a very defined project initiation process that starts in their sales and their finance ERP systems, and Teams is somewhere way down the queue. So the ability to have a workflow that kicks off on that and uses this concept of template, but nobody's actually requesting it. It's just, hey, the project just got signed off and it's now live and going, and we need a spot to work. So let's just go create it and spin it up from there. So we're seeing a lot of interest, and we're doing quite a number of different projects on that side, whether we're tying into SAP, to custom ERP, to Salesforce, to Dynamics 365. I mean, this is something that you see not that far out in the future on a product roadmap on the Orchestry side, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it was really interesting when we started speaking to customers and partners, the same thing, where they really wanted that ability, like you said, that the creation of a team or a SharePoint site or whatever that is part of a larger process. So we're working with someone. They had a really good example. They're like a real estate company, and what they wanted to do is they have like a central real estate sort of list, I guess, and then when they put in an entry into that real estate list, things get created. So a team gets created, a SharePoint site gets created, but also there's like another external thing where a website gets spun up. So that's something as well that we're looking at. And the other thing as well, just from an extensibility perspective, what we are doing in Orchestry is putting in like a post-provision webhook. So then you can go to Power Automate or Logic Apps or Azure Functions or whatever that is, and do something after. And I think it's really interesting. I don't know how much of this was done a few years ago, but definitely that integration story is much more, I guess, prevalent in customers' minds. Being able to do that, and it'd be interesting, like I said, later on when you look at Flow and Power Apps and some of the new capabilities around that, about really having a pretty tight integrated story around kind of all of those M365 capabilities, right? It could be Teams, could be part of it. Dynamics could be part of it. Maybe there's some workflow stuff happening, something in OneDrive, something in SharePoint. But I totally agree with you. I think that integration story is becoming more and more prevalent for lots of customers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about our core product on the Extranet User Manager side, which is all about inviting people into your organization from a customer portal, vendor portal, donor portal, wherever the scenario may be for your org. I mean, I'd love to see that in Orchestry, that we can hook off of that webhook and create a group in Extranet User Manager that's all set up and ready for you to invite external people in a defined way. Because that whole external sharing side, yeah, there's a lot of choices from Microsoft, and people don't do it right, and then IT gets worried about it and they just lock it all down because they said no, people aren't sharing securely. But if you can do it in a very prescribed way, the people don't need to make security decisions. They just make decisions on who I want to share this with, and everything else is templatized and baked for them. It kind of follows that same pattern.
No, I totally agree. I mean, I think definitely from the EUM side, you guys do a great job around that guest access. But yeah, if you can then extend that as well, when it wouldn't be just to Orchestra, it'd be anything really with M365. I think that would be super, super powerful also.
Cool. Well, why don't we take a quick pivot here? I'm going to grab presentation. I've got the Microsoft form up here.
Perfect. We're going to do a live presentation swap, everyone. So this could either go well or horribly wrong. There we go. That went surprisingly well.
We have a pretty picture up. I shared the right screen.
We do.
Okay,
Perfect.
Cool. Yes, so thank you, everybody. We got 30 responses back between the ahead of time, and I think we got 10 or so while we were talking here. So kudos for multitasking there. Not surprisingly, the vast majority of people are using Microsoft 365 today. This is an interesting one here. This is kind of showing the spread of different products that people are using. And when we look at the Teams, SharePoint, Outlook, and even OneNote, actually, I'm happy to see that one high up in there, because a lot of people don't really realize what OneNote is, and the fact that it's actually free. You don't even have to be a Microsoft 365 customer. It's in Windows 10. You can light it up for free and use it personally. Where it really shines, though, is from a group note-taking point of view. So every team that gets created has an underlying modern team site. That modern team site has a OneNote created for it. And if you surface that as a tab in Teams, which is what both Michael and I were talking about, it becomes a really powerful way to collaborate there. And it's all, the co-authoring features that you see now in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, they've been there for years on the OneNote side as well. So you can live see one person typing, another person in the same OneNote. It works really well from that perspective. Surprisingly,
I'm a huge fan. Sorry, just before you go on, Peter, I have to say I'm a huge fan of OneNote. I mean, I'm shocked by just how many capabilities there are in OneNote. You can even put tasks in there, which are now going to be, surfaced up through some of those other task management. Yeah. I mean, it's just such a fantastic tool. It's super easy to use. Like I think a lot of the other, some of the other capabilities in M365 are a little bit more complex, but definitely from note taking, I think OneNote is such a good product. I think this might be one of the reasons that the out of the box wiki capabilities within
just pale in comparison.
Teams, just pale in comparison. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now Stream is kind of an underutilized one. It looks like here, a little less than half of the folks using it. So if you've recorded a meeting in Team, that recording ends up in Stream as part of that. And there are still some challenges there. We face this all the time, that we're either a guest on somebody else's team or they're a guest on ours, and when that recording is in Stream, the external people can't access, and we have to download it and put it up somewhere else. I mean, again, I'm kind of holding my breath to see what they're announcing at Ignite around that side too, because that's another pain point. But it's super cool, the fact that not only is the recording there, it does the transcription, it lights it up in search, so I can actually search and find a particular point in the recording and zoom right into that point. And I mentioned earlier this idea of channels exist in Stream and in Teams, but they're not connected to each other. What we do in practice, I mean, we have to do this manually because we don't have the automation yet from Microsoft, is we create channels in Stream to match the channels in the team side. Like if I go over here, this is actually our corporate teams that I'm sharing here, and we can see our standard department level teams that we've got. But this is an example project that I'm free to share. It's actually a pro bono philanthropic project. And so the idea is VRX Therapy is our client, and then we run multiple projects underneath that. And you can see here, we've got our posts and files that you see as standard tabs. We've got our OneNote there, so we've got all our notes, and we've got sections for each of these channels in that OneNote. I come over to Stream. One of the challenges I have with Stream is, okay, we had a meeting about this 6 months ago, and we've literally got hundreds of recordings in our Stream portal. How do I find it? Well, if we tag the video when we record it in Stream against the channel that we've created in Stream, and then we've got this tab wired to just show us that channel, boom, there's all our call recordings from this particular topic on this project for this client. So it just makes it so much easier to go back and find that stuff, because it's really valuable. I mean, we'll do walkthroughs with clients where they show us their current system and talk about their ideas for the future. Being able to look at that later and pull together your notes, even if you're the PM and you want to write meeting notes after the fact, it's hugely powerful from that point of view.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I think Microsoft really needs to do a bit of a better job around that integration, particularly like you said. I think that the story should be when you create a stream channel or when you create a group, you can have a stream group, and those channels should be linked.
They should be connected.
Yeah, just a bit awkward. And then again, just big ups to Microsoft. Did everyone see that live refresh as well? Peter didn't even do anything, and the responses changed from 30 to 31. That's pretty cool.
There was an F5 key press in there somewhere.
Oh, was there? Oh, okay. No, I thought it was
Sorry.
automatic. Okay, sorry. You deceived everyone, Peter. Everyone's been deceived. There we go.
So OneDrive, not surprising up there too. Planner actually quite well here. More than 50% of the people on the Planner side. Not sure if everybody's aware. There's actually a big connection building between To Do and Planner. So To Do, for people who aren't aware, is becoming the clearinghouse for tasks. Microsoft knows there's a problem that people have Outlook tasks and Planner tasks and project tasks and SharePoint list tasks, all these different places, and trying to keep track of all of them in one spot is a nightmare. So now your Planner tasks actually flow into your personal To-Do, and it merges in your Outlook tasks, and it gives you one pane of glass to see all of that. They're building more and more integrations into that To-Do side. I think we'll see lots of stuff from a Microsoft lists and To-Do point of view as well. So that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's a free product, just like OneNote. You don't have to be on 365. You can use it for your personal task management or your corporate.
Yeah, and they've got a really nice mobile app as well. Like I use To Do as well for personal stuff. It's pretty neat. They do a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking at how people communicate internally. So not surprisingly, email is still the dominant communication method for most people. If I look at Envision IT, our internal email communication is almost zero. It generally consists of something we were too lazy to turn into a Teams conversation that started with an outside email. Yes, we still predominantly use email for external client and vendor communications, but everything inside happens through Teams. And while I talk about this, working out loud of channel conversations versus individual chat, I've looked at the stats on our tenant. I mean, we're still 8-to-1. Chat versus channel conversation. So people still tend to go towards the channel side. There's a neat score that one of our partner vendors, Tygraph, they do a lot of analytics around how you use 365. They call it their serendipity score. And it's basically how many people joined a conversation in Teams that were never mentioned or were never part of the original thread. And they basically discovered a valuable piece of knowledge, and they've either benefited from it or contributed to it. I mean, that's the idea of working out loud and having it available there. I use the example that if you're on a big project, we've got one with one of our clients that's approaching the 12-month mark, lots of people involved in it, and people come and go. You get a new project team member 6 months in on the project. If everything happened through email, they got a completely blank slate. They don't see any of the history of anything that's been happening on that project. If you were working out loud, doing that in a Teams channel, they've got all the history there. They can go back to last week, last month, 6 months ago, and see all that history there. It can be a little overwhelming sometimes, but it's better than being locked in somebody else's black box. And then from a document point of view, we actually put it down as Microsoft Teams and Team Sites. As Michael, as you mentioned, a lot of people say I like doing my documents in Teams rather than SharePoint. Well, the reality is it's actually the same thing. Under the hood, it's one place that it's going to from that point of view. But a lot of folks still doing the My Documents. Hopefully where folks are doing that, IT has mapped that to their OneDrive for Business, so at least you've got a cloud backup of what's going on. What you don't want to have is that stuff only living on the C drive of your laptop, and if that gets toasted, you're toasted, because that's all gone. I mean, I could lose my laptop and I would cry because I quite like my Surface laptop, but getting a new one and plug it into the cloud and everything's there and up and running again from there.
Peter, just one question here from Linda. Thank you, Linda. What's the retention on chat messages in Teams if you don't use email or use little email to communicate. I assume this is about your internal usage of Teams here.
I know you can define that. I'm not really strong personally on the retention policies, but I know just like everything else in 365, you can define policies. I actually saw a case study from healthcare from a chat point of view, and they said a retention policy of 24 hours because nurse and doctor staff were using chats and they were sending pictures of patient records and such back and forth. So from a personal health information point of view, it was a big deal. They said, you know what, these don't need to live beyond a day. I need a quick consult with a doctor that's not here and an opinion, and then we're done. It just needs to go away. So I mean, you do have that flexibility. Exactly how you do that, I sorry, I can't define that for you. Michael, I don't know if you go deeper on that side.
No, I don't. No, I mean, we don't use any retention at all. From most of the customers that we've spoken to, they're using retention more from a legal side,
right?
You know, because the storage issue was not like it used to be, right? On-prem, where people were concerned about hard drive space. Now, no one cares, and I don't really know if there's a limit on chat messages if Microsoft's gonna impose.
Yeah, it's more from a liability point of view. You know, is there an exposure of
so, yeah.
things for too long from a SOX or from a legal hold point of view?
Yeah, but that doctor one's fascinating. That's actually really, really interesting, huh? That's very cool.
Taking
Great
the
example.
complete opposite spectrum. Yeah.
Very cool.
So sharing documents, still lots of email attachments. I have to say that's a pet peeve of mine. I hate when people email me documents. Although we had some challenges, Michael, just getting the sharing back and forth with us. I mean, there's some rough edges there on the actual presentation for this session itself. So it's not always easy, and email attachments tend to work. So that often ends up being the default for a lot of people. But I'm a much bigger fan of linking to SharePoint or OneDrive from there.
Yeah, no, I think that whole experience of guest users, I know you're obviously an expert on this with the Extranet User Manager, but it in order to get people away from, from attachments, it has to be seamless. I mean, it has to be completely, you know, seamless, and it has to be friction-free, right? And I think there's definitely been, it's definitely much better, I think, than it used to be. But yeah, like as soon as you know, people are fickle, right? So if you're used to attaching, attachments, and then you're made to do this another way, as soon as it doesn't work, as far as you're concerned, it's dead to you, and you'll never try that again. Yeah. So I think, I think that process. And listen, if we're having trouble, Peter, if we're having trouble to work in this, then who knows what's going out there in people that have real jobs.
Yeah. I mean, kudos to Microsoft. They've made things to help that along. Like when I go to email a document that's stored in cloud storage, it defaults to saying, hey, do you want to share a link for this? Or instead, do you want to attach it? So they're kind of gently trying to encourage people to take the other path, which is nice to see. And then just from an online meeting point of view, obviously joining through Teams, sharing your webcam pretty high there. I mean, that's something I'm trying to do just from a company policy point of view, set a bit of a policy there that, hey, we should be sharing our webcams. We actually haven't worked together physically in 6 months. We're not back in the office. I've told my staff, 2021 at best, at some point, we're going to be back in the physical office, because I don't see a point of reduced and personal protective measures for our business. We're working well remotely, but it's still nice to see somebody's face and have a bit of a connection from that point of view. And then just, I guess that reiterates back to the stream side, not everybody using the recording features in there. Do encourage that. That's a really useful point of view. Flip side, make sure that you're transparent about it. Yes, Teams will tell people, but it's always polite to say, hey, does anybody object if I hit the record button before I start recording this session, and go from there.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I've been on a couple of sessions, and then I think if you're not told that it's recording, or you kind of miss out, or you don't know the UI piece that says within a Teams meeting that you are being recorded, it can be a pretty awkward conversation halfway through when someone's like, hang on, is this being recorded? And then what do you do, right? You can't really do much.
Cool. So we kind of alluded to this one earlier. We've got an open source solution that we've developed independently. You've got a really nice product that you've just launched this summer called Orchestry. Why should somebody look at one versus the other on there? I mean, we've built ours on the PNP commandlets, which are open source pieces that Microsoft and a broader ecosystem has built out. We've seen challenges there. There's rough edges. It's not most people's paid jobs to keep that up and current and working properly. So there's some reliability challenges there. You actually made a decision not to use any of those commandlets as part of your process, correct, Michael?
Yeah, so we started using, so we do have some PMP stuff in there for sure. Not the commandlets, but some of the actual source code that they use. So we use a little bit of PMP, but the same thing, you know, we had to really expand upon it and add some additional capabilities, because there's some things that simply from the way that PMP is constructed that it just doesn't do things. So for instance, within PMP, you can't copy over documents, for instance, right? So that was something that was really important for us from a templating perspective. And we also wanted to have a whole range of advanced capabilities around, you know, channels and tabs in particular, and supporting things like OneNote, which seems like an easy thing, but surprisingly isn't when you're trying to do templates. But yeah, definitely, you know, I think a lot of people use PMP. It's an absolutely fantastic tool set, but like you said, it's no one's full-time job to make sure that this is reliable. And in addition to that, you know, some of those Microsoft provisioning APIs as well, some of them are very, very new. So it is going to take some time for them to be a little bit more robust as well. So that's some of the other issues that we've ran into.
Yeah, I suppose we should call it that elephant, which is the provisioning itself from Microsoft in 365 often leaves to be desired. We see a lot of asynchronous processes that are happening in the background, and you know, you think you've asked it to do something, but it actually hasn't done it. And you see this in the UI now when you go to the Teams app and you go add a member, and it says, you know, by the way, it might take 24 hours before this person's actually in this team. You know, and we see that across under the hood. You know, that's certainly been a challenge that we've faced. I imagine you have as well.
Yeah, I mean, we've so the way that we've programmed Orchestry is we just assume everything's going to fail all of the time. That's basically the way.
Take that approach.
Yeah, that's the approach. I mean, it is the cloud, right? So like I said, those APIs are really, really good, but they're new, and just because the scale of things. And the problem with provisioning as well is there's an order that you have to do things, and it's not like if one thing fails, you can just keep going. So you do have to have some sort of reliability and retry there. And like you said, the best example I think is probably the Teams logo. Like if you've ever gone and created a team and then you've tried to upload a logo, even through the Teams UI, you'll sometimes find there's issues there. So what we did with Orchestry is we actually try that 8 times, and we have an exponential back off. And we've gone to the stage where we've actually got some analytics around that, because we're trying to understand what it is. And for some of the tenants, that logo goes through every single time. For other tenants, we might have to try 4 or 5 times, right, for it to go through. But like I said, you know, the problem with building these provisioning solutions is you need to have a level of automation and robustness there, which can be complicated technically. It's also something that can be a little bit difficult if you're trying to use something like Power Automate, right? Because Power Automate isn't really geared to handling exceptions particularly well, unlike custom code.
Yeah, I mean, it can, but you have to be pretty savvy to figure out that where you should be doing that, how and such. Yeah,
absolutely. And also I know that you've like you mentioned before, Peter, you know, your open source tool was really geared around that integration piece, right? You've got a lot of kind of, I mean, it's open source, so you can do whatever you want, but I know that you've really tried to make sure that you've got some really nice integration hooks into that product.
That's been a big part of it, yeah, is driving that integration story, either from a initiation, you know, if something in a backend system starts the provisioning, or as you say on the webhook style in Orchestry, that, hey, I want certain things to happen once it's got created that are specific to this particular organization. User experience, you got to show off a bit of Orchestry, so why don't you take the presentation back and dazzle us a bit with some of the cool stuff you've done there.
Okay, hang on. This is going to get crazy. I show my screen. There we go. Just let me know if you can see my screen here, Peter.
Yep, got the PowerPoint.
This is very seamless. I'm shocked, everyone. Usually this things. The last time we tried this just before.
But we're not using Teams. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah. So so from a user experience side, I think for us, I'm a big fan of user experience. I just like really beautiful, simple things. So what we've tried to do with Orchestry is probably added a bit of UX or quite a bit of UX around the product. So from the management side, you know, that ability for admins to see things in a nice interface. I think from the admin side, a lot of the products, especially on M365, no one cares about the poor admins. You want to make it beautiful for them as well, right? So even to the point
they're
where
starting to get some love with the modern admins, but it took a while. Yeah,
they are. Yeah. So even to the point of, you know, once a request comes through, I think we talked about approvals as well. You know, as an admin, I can see this entire request and what people asked for and everything else. But really, what we tried to do from the UX side, particularly from the end user side, you know, if you don't know about Orchestry, the idea with this is you can create templates really quickly and really easily. They could be Teams based, they could be SharePoint based, they could have all of those other capabilities through there. And what we've tried to do is, instead of just having a simple form, which we found was useful, we've tried to we've developed this thing called the Workspace request wizard. So we're trying to step users through that process of requesting a site or a team or what we call workspaces to make it super simple. So a good example of that is, let's say we want to work on a project together, Peter, as part of the Mark 8 kind of initiative. We can choose this Mark 8 project workspace. And then here what we've done, which is quite unique in Orchestry, is this idea that you can also customize this workspace. So once again, we want to empower users not just to choose from a template, but maybe to start off with the template and then customize that in a couple of different ways. So one of the ways is obviously around document templates, right? So within Orchestry, you can have document templates which are attached to the actual workspace template as well, but you can also make what we call optional document templates, so some suggested documents for this workspace. So maybe, we've worked on a project before. We know that this is the template, but there's also a couple of additional document templates that I want to add. So let's add the marketing collateral and the project vision template and the sales report for Mark 9. So pretty easy, pretty simple. Behind the scenes, what we do, we use a lot of the Graph API here to generate these thumbnails and everything else. But what's nice about this as a user is I can go in and add these document templates to this request. And then when we do the provisioning on the Orchestry side, we'll make sure that the latest version of those templates is added. We'll add it to that the new menu as well for the shared documents library. So users are really, really quick and ready to go. And just a final thing from the UX side, one of the biggest things we heard was around team sprawl. And I think we mentioned this around governance. And typically team sprawl is a result, I guess, of a couple of different things. So it's either duplicated teams or incorrectly named teams. So what we do with Orchestry, which I really like, so let's say you're working in a big company and you're starting to create or starting to request a workspace through here. M365 is going to allow you to create, something, whatever you want, as long as it's named differently, and that naming can be really, really subtle. So, global marketing versus global space marketing, even though they're conceptually the same thing, M365 isn't smart enough to know that, so to allow you to create that. What we try to do in Orchestry is say, hey, before you create something called marketing, here's other stuff that you have access to that kind of looks like something that you're trying to create. And this is incredibly useful from that end user side, because I might not even know that there is a site called global marketing here, right? Or a site called product marketing. So I can go and do that. We found that super handy from the perspective of stopping that sprawl. Of course, if I go and try to put in something that already exists, we're going to tell you that's a no-no. And also the concept of blocked words as well. So once again, from that naming convention perspective, it can be really powerful. And what we've also tried to do is, let's call it Project Theta 7 here. What we've also tried to do from a naming convention perspective is you can apply naming conventions within Orchestry. So here we've got a naming convention applied that we're going to have PROJ prepended to the name of the team. Also, this is the group name, which is going to be automatically generated. Also, this is the logo that we can upload, and then we'll try to do this until it works. And then some other user experience pieces in terms of adding on custom metadata, team description, and all of that stuff.
Yeah, so I guess part of this is not just creating it, but building it in a way that people can find it again later. Like I was saying, with that flat hierarchy, this concept of divisions to group things together and be able to navigate it later and find that particular team is important.
It is, yeah. And what we do, once you've requested and gone through this process, the other feature of Orchestry is what we call the Workspace directory. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Peter. So this ability to be able to categorize content at the team or the site or the com site level. And what's really kind of handy about this is, of course, you can have your own custom metadata here. So I can say, show me all of the teams that belong to research and development and sales and marketing. Like being able to do that, I don't know why Microsoft hasn't built something like this. I hope that they don't, because it's part of their product. But there we go.
It's a killer feature.
It's a super useful feature, right? Just being able to see that, because then you're allowing your end users from a high level to really understand what belongs to what, which makes it really handy. And then we've got some other capabilities, some favoriting, and you can show that in slightly different ways also. But really that ability to be able to find content, I think this is something that's really handy to stop from that sprawl, because in a lot of cases people are creating teams or SharePoint sites, maybe because they don't know that it exists, and to stop people from creating teams and SharePoint sites which aren't at all useful. Once again, you've got this concept of of workflows and approvals enabled. And like I said, I think from an approval perspective, as long as it's quick, as long as it's easy, people are pretty happy with that also. And just so you know, for everyone, we've looked at a lot of teams and a lot of sprawl around teams. The favorite name of any team that I've seen ever created was an organization that rolled out teams, no governance. They had, I think, 5,000 teams created in the first 3 months. 4,900 of them they had to delete after 3 months as well because they were useless. But there was a team that was called Do Not Invite John. And I thought that was the best name for a team and probably the best idea of why you should have a little bit of governance in your as part of your team's creation.
Michael, I hate to cut you off. I just want to switch back, so I'm going to grab the presentation here for a minute. Let me just flip over there. Yeah, so we got last topic, and then we got some wrap-up points. So Norm asked the question, perfectly valid one, why aren't we using Teams to do this session today, right now? And the reality is that Teams was built as an internal collaboration tool, and it really hasn't been built well for doing public events. And that's a challenge. You've got to bring external users in. If we ran this as a Teams meeting rather than a live event, everybody in this event would see everybody else's contact information, and if you were a vendor, you could scrape our whole event and start spamming everybody who attended here. So from a privacy point of view, that's not cool. If it was a live event, yeah, we wouldn't have that. We would use a lot of the interaction in a live event. As a presenter, I don't even see who's on it, and the Q&A is very much more removed. There's a producer role. It's really intended for big, large scale, thousands or tens of thousands of people attending that event kind of scale. So this is where we get into the external user side, and we're actually going through this right now. You can check this site out. It's not actually live just right now. Well, it is, but it's not the official site yet for Teams Day Online. It's a conference that's happening in 2 weeks and 1 day, which I'm keenly aware of because we're building as we go. We're doing the back end side around the registration on this, and the idea is that we're going to be creating separate tenant accounts for every person that registers, and then bringing them as a guest into a second tenant. So there's kind of a double Teams tenant going on here, just to provide that anonymization that people aren't sharing all of their contact details through there. So we're still working through some of the details on that. We're not running the conference itself. Respacero out of the US is doing an awesome job. They're approaching 4,000 people registered for this. So it's going to stress test the whole approach out. But stay tuned on how that goes. And really, it's this idea of bringing external users into a team. It's a challenge. Right now, Microsoft hasn't dealt well with this well. And it's not just the fact that private data gets shared back and forth. It's the fact that you need to switch tenants, and you basically lose all of your notifications and all of your activity, what's going on in your main tenant, when you switch into your other tenant. You can deal with it. You can create browser profiles in Chrome or in Edge and have multiple teams running that way. I actually recently figured out how to run multiple Teams clients. I've got 2 running right now, live as we go right now, but that's kind of outside the scope of a typical user. So Microsoft really needs to fix this and make it better. But for now, we're trying to address that through that. I mean, we're looking at building features in an Extranet User Manager, and actually the conference is driving a lot of that in terms of auto invite into Teams based on external invitations that we're managing and things like that. So stay tuned on more points on that side. So just from a wrap-up point of view, I think we're both on the same page, Michael, that Teams and 365 groups, it's not one or the other, it's both always together, and they are a great way to manage projects. You've got a lot of tools there. Looks like most of the audience is actually using most of those, so kudos to you. And there's a few there that maybe explore a bit more from that point of view. The what to use when I mentioned, I mean, we've got Outlook email, we've got Yammer that we haven't even talked about, we've got Teams, 3 completely different modalities around how you communicate. Doesn't mean you have to pick it organizationally, but for a project, please don't have half your project team use email and half use Teams. Like, agree and have a common way of communicating. The governance, the fact that Microsoft 365 is changing all the time really quickly. So your governance is not a point in time either. It needs to move with that. This idea of information architecture that kind of grew out of the SharePoint side, but now comes into the team side of things. And once you figure that out, have some sort of provisioning process that helps manage that. I've been going rapid fire here because we only got 3 minutes left, but other wrap-up points you want to make, Michael, before we jump over to upcoming?
No, I think this is good. I mean, I think, like I said, definitely in terms of the governance standpoint, yeah, M365 is changing a lot, so you have to be pretty Pretty agile, I think. Yeah. And what about some upcoming events, Peter? So obviously you got the Teams Day online thing as well.
That's a big one for us.
We've got stressing you out a bit.
We've talked about Extranet User Manager. We've got a talk on that at the beginning of October. I'm actually making a whole event about how we're going to run Teams Day online. So hopefully that doesn't blow up in my face. But the plan is to kind of explain how we've pulled that off and participating in the European Collaboration Summit later in October. And then there's a number of Orchestry events here as well, Michael.
We do, yeah. So we're running a bunch of events. So a little bit around governance on September the 29th. Also probably the one, if you're interested, the post-Ignite session highlights. So Ignite's coming up, I think it's next week, right? So
it is, yeah.
A couple of weeks after that, we'll be sharing some of the insights from that as well. So yeah, make sure you join myself and Peter as well. There's a lot of good stuff coming up, and it's all virtual now as well. So you can listen to it whenever you need to.
There were a couple of wrap-up questions here. I'm not sure we're going to have time. I mean, one was about the 24-hour lag. Have we seen it? I haven't seen it personally anywhere near that sort of, but like Michael said, you kind of have to try things, and when they fail, which they never really do, try them again is kind of the reality of things in 365. I mean, the Teams team and an Orchestry Workspace are very much one and the same, aren't they, Michael?
Correct. Yeah. So this is from Sam. Yeah. So Sam, think of a Orchestry Workspace as something that's based either on a Microsoft team or a SharePoint site or a group. So it's like an abstraction of those pieces. But if you have more questions, Sam, just feel free to reach out to us as well.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, we're going to share the deck, contact information in there. As Michael so politely said, yeah, we're open for free consulting. So throw your questions out there. We can follow up after from there. So we're right at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of people's times. Thank you very much for attending, and hope that was useful for everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Peter. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Michael.